Julian Cross had built walls higher than the cliffs surrounding his coastal mansion. After his brutal public breakup with a celebrity fiancé that played out on every gossip site and streaming channel, he vanished from the spotlight. No more interviews, no more product launches. He disappeared into a fortress of steel and glass, known as the Glass Nest, a minimalist marvel perched on the bluffs of Carmel Highlands, California. To the public, he was a ghost. To the world of tech, he was a cautionary tale of genius burned by fame. But within the hidden corridors of his sanctuary, Julian was simply a man trying to forget. He spoke little to the staff, trusted no one, and spent his days sketching artificial intelligence models and his nights alone. Isla Moreno was hired through a third-party service, someone's cousin's friend who vouched she was clean, quiet, and temporary. That was all Julian needed. She arrived, discreetly clocked in quietly, and moved like a shadow in the bright, sterile house. Petite, reserved, and often with earbuds tucked beneath the dark curls, she gave no hint of her story. She never lingered. She never asked questions. Most importantly, she never looked him in the eye. That morning, Isla had been cleaning the guest hallway. The sun through the floor-to-ceiling windows made the marble sweat, and her uniform clung to her back. She moved quickly, vacuuming and dusting with robotic efficiency, unaware that Julian was just a room away on a call with his investor board, pacing restlessly in his study. The guest bathroom at the end of the hall was rarely used. She had cleaned it the day before and knew the water pressure was faulty. When she heard the subtle hiss of water running inside, she assumed it had turned on again from the faulty sensor. She stepped in to check, noticed her own reflection, the sweat on her face, and hesitated. No one else was home. The head housekeeper had left. The security system confirmed Julian was locked in his study. 10 minutes. That was all she needed. A quick rinse. She had a fresh towel in her cleaning cart. Isla hesitated, then locked the door behind her. Or at least she thought she did. Julian was looking for an old blueprint model he had left in the guest room during a late-night sketching session. He ended the call abruptly, distracted his mind, swirling with code and pressure. He pushed open the door without knocking. The sound that came next was soft, startled, and unforgettable. Isla stood frozen, a towel clutched to her chest, eyes wide in shock. Her skin still damp, her breath caught between fear and disbelief. Julian froze too. The image carved itself instantly into his memory, not because she was undressed, but because the guarded girl who never looked up had finally met his gaze. He muttered an apology, turned around so fast he knocked into the wall and shut the door behind him like it had burned him. His heart wasn't racing from shame. It was something else entirely, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Isla stood trembling behind the door, heart pounding. Her first thought was to run, to resign, to disappear before anyone laughed or whispered. She had survived too much to become a joke in a stranger's house. But the door stayed closed. There was no yelling, no accusations, just silence. And somehow that silence said everything. Julian Cross had never intended to stay in California for more than a few months. The Glass Nest was supposed to be a temporary escape, a place to recalibrate after everything fell apart. But the longer he stayed, the more the silence became a comfort, and the fewer reasons he found to return to the city. The mansion was a modern fortress, a home carved into the cliffs, built almost entirely of glass and steel, with panoramic views of the Pacific Ocean. Designed by an award-winning architect, it was praised in magazines for its brilliance and criticized for its coldness. Julian liked it that way. Everything was motion-censored, voice-activated, and password-protected. Except for the people. The few staff who worked there, rotated in shifts, trained to avoid conversation and stay out of sight. That was how Julian preferred it. No distractions, no emotional entanglements. Just data design and control. He had once been the prodigy of Silicon Valley, a billionaire before 30, celebrated for developing one of the most intuitive AI frameworks in the world. But all that fame brought eyes, and those eyes eventually brought betrayal. His ex-fiancée had turned their relationship into a marketing campaign, monetizing their romance into reality shows, podcast episodes, and press tours. The day she announced their breakup on live television, Julian disappeared from the public eye, sold half his shares, and vanished into the hills. Isla Moreno knew none of this when she took the job. She had only heard rumors from the agency that he was brilliant but reclusive, rich but cold. She didn't care. She needed the money. After her father's high-profile financial scandal left her family bankrupt and her mother in need of constant care, Isla dropped out of her interior design program in New York and moved back west. She changed her last name, erased her social media, and quietly slipped into the world of invisible labor. She wasn't ashamed of cleaning. She was ashamed of being recognized. The moment someone said her full name out loud, they usually followed it with an accusation. Glass Nest was different. No one spoke here. No one asked questions. She could blend into the background and earn enough to help her family survive. The mansion itself was clinical and beautiful, with rooms that felt like museums. There was a rooftop garden filled with sculpted bonsai trees, a minimalist kitchen with custom stone counters, and a glass-walled studio where Julian worked on sketches and tech prototypes. There were no family photos, no clutter, and no signs of life beyond the essentials. Julian kept to himself. Most days, Isla only heard his footsteps or the faint sound of jazz from the studio late at night. He rarely addressed her. The few times their paths crossed, he only offered a polite nod or a quiet thank you. She appreciated that. Silence was safer. But after the bathroom incident, something shifted. Julian no longer ignored her presence. He didn't speak, but he noticed. There was a flicker of recognition, now a hesitation in his gaze whenever she entered a room. And Isla felt it too, that strange current in the air, charged and uncertain. She didn't know what to make of it. Julian was a world she didn't belong to. His mind, his money, his story, they were oceans away from hers. Still, there was something human in the way he avoided her now, as if embarrassed, not superior. She expected him to fire her, but he didn't. Instead, he adjusted the security code to her cleaning zones, giving her access to the lower-level studio. He started leaving out empty cups and small messes as if inviting her into his space. It was subtle, it was deliberate, and it was terrifying. Isla told herself not to overthink it. Her job was temporary. She was just a name on a timesheet. But that didn't explain why for the first time in months she had started to draw again. She found herself sketching corners of the mansion. During her breaks, the way the morning light hit the stairwell, the curve of the garden path, the contrast between steel and sky. She drew quickly, secretly, and always on scraps she intended to throw away. She never thought anyone would see them. She certainly didn't expect the man who lived in silence to start watching her like she was the only voice he could hear. Julian didn't know, when the curiosity started, only that it refused to go away. In the beginning, he told himself it was because of the accident, that strange and awkward moment at the bathroom door. But as the days passed, he realized he was watching her long before that. He had noticed how she handled fragile objects like they carried memories, how she adjusted paintings by a fraction of an inch until they were perfectly aligned, how she moved through the house like someone trained to vanish. But Isla was not invisible to him anymore. She had become a part of his awareness, an interruption to his isolation. At first, he avoided crossing paths with her, but avoidance only heightened his awareness. Every footstep she took echoed louder. Every time she brushed past him with her head down, he found his eyes following the trail she left behind. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, his behavior changed. He started working in the kitchen instead of his studio when she cleaned nearby. He timed his coffee breaks to when she dusted the common area. He left the radio on jazz and ambient piano, just loud enough for her to hear. She didn't react, not directly. But once when he left his cup near the sink, he returned later to find it washed dried and placed perfectly on the counter alongside a small square of paper towel, where she had drawn a single line. A curved staircase. His staircase. At first he thought it was random, but the next day there was a window pane with the sun angling through. The day after that, a sketch of the garden rock arrangements he had never paid attention to until now. Julian began to collect them. Not openly. He simply tucked them into a drawer in the studio, as if preserving pieces of a language neither of them dared speak. Isla, for her part, noticed the shift, too. She felt the weight of his gaze, soft but persistent. He never spoke beyond pleasantries, never crossed lines, but his attention lingered. It made her anxious. Not because she feared him, but because she feared herself. She had worked too hard to rebuild what little stability she had. Feelings didn't belong in this house, and yet they arrived without permission. One evening, well past midnight, she was scrubbing the floor of the inner corridor leading to the glass studio. She wore old sneakers and headphones, her hair pulled back, loosely humming without realizing it. When she looked up, Julian was standing at the edge of the hallway, holding a sketch pad. She pulled out one earbud quickly and stood. "I didn't mean to disturb you," she said. His voice was quieter than she expected. "You didn't. I was watching the lights in the hallway." "You hum when you work," you know that Isla flushed. "Sorry, I can stop." He shook his head. "No, I liked it." He stepped closer. She could smell cedar and ink on him. There was a tension in the air, delicate but undeniable. "You should be asleep," he said. She smiled faintly. "So should you." His eyes searched hers, hesitant but open. About that day he began the bathroom. "I've been thinking about it more than I probably should." Isla's breath caught. She didn't know how to respond, but Julian didn't wait for her to. "You're not just the girl who cleans. I see the way you study this house, the way you see things others miss. You're not invisible, Isla. Not to me." She wanted to deny it, to step back into her protective shell, but something inside her cracked open. The next day, Julian left a book on the counter near her cleaning supplies. It was an old architecture guide with notes scribbled in the margins. Inside the cover, a post-it note in his handwriting. "I thought you might like this." Isla stared at it for a long time. Then she tucked it into her bag and didn't say a word. From that moment, the air between them changed. She began finding reasons to linger near the studio. He started asking small questions. Do you like this tile pattern? What would you change in this layout? Questions that seemed casual but carried weight. One morning she found a small pile of coffee grounds spilled near the sink. Deliberate, a test. She looked up toward the hallway camera, half expecting to see him watching. She cleaned it, drew a quick sketch of a coffee mug with a crooked handle, and left it taped to the cupboard. The next day there was a real mug on the table with the same crooked handle. He had made it himself in the studio's ceramic printer. For you, he said simply. She took it with shaking hands. Julian had never needed anyone. Not emotionally, not after everything. But this wasn't need, it was recognition of something soft, something true. Isla began to look forward to their unspoken rituals. A mug left on the table, a book turned to a page, a napkin sketch folded in his planner. They still didn't say the things they felt, but they were saying it in other ways. Then came the night that changed everything again. She was organizing cables in the server room, crouched down her fingers, brushing cold metal when he entered quietly. You shouldn't be down here alone, he said. It's fine, she replied. I'm careful. He moved closer. I know. That's what scares me. Isla looked up at him, heart thudding. What do you mean? He knelt in front of her just far enough not to touch. I watch you treat every piece of this house with care. You move through it like it's sacred. No one's ever treated anything I built like that. Not even me. For a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of the house's power system. Then he reached out slowly, touching the edge of her sleeve. May I? She didn't pull away. Their fingers met. The moment stretched. Then Isla pulled back, stood quickly, and said I should go. Julian didn't follow. He let her walk away. But later that night, when she returned to the guest quarters, there was a small light glowing from under her door. She pushed it open and found a new sketch pad on her bed. On the first page, in simple print, was a message. If you ever want to design again, I'll make the space. No expectations, no pressure, just you and the page. Isla sat on the edge of the bed and wept. Not because he had given her something, but because he had seen something she thought no one ever would again. Isla had always been careful. She kept her real name hidden, never spoke about her past, and made sure no one could trace her back to the girl who once walked red carpets beside her father at charity galas. She had deleted everything that connected her to that version of her life, but the fear of discovery never left. Every time Julian looked at her too long or asked a question that felt too personal, her guard would snap back into place. But he never pushed, he only invited. And over time, those invitations became harder to resist. She began using the sketch pad he left her, only at night, only behind locked doors. At first, it was simple shapes, test lines, color blocks. But then her fingers remembered how to dream. She drew spaces, imaginary ones, then real ones. She redesigned the hallway leading to the rooftop garden. She sketched improvements for the storage flow in the kitchen. She even redesigned his studio desk, making it more efficient. And when she accidentally left one of the pages on the counter, she panicked. She rushed back, hoping to retrieve it before anyone saw, but it was gone. Hours later, Julian entered the hallway, passed her silently, and gently placed a ceramic pencil holder on the edge of the table. It matched her sketch exactly. Nothing was said, nothing needed to be. But Isla knew then that he had seen it. And instead of asking questions, he had listened. That scared her more than anything. People only listened when they wanted something. She told herself not to trust it, not to trust him. But Julian never took advantage of the silence between them. He only made room for it. Then came the dinner invitation. It arrived in the form of a note tucked under her cup one morning. Just dinner, nothing formal. I owe you a thank you for saving me from my own terrible desk design. Isla laughed despite herself. She tried to refuse. She left a simple note that said, "I'm your employee, not your guest." But when she returned to her room that night, there was a dress laid out on her bed. Not expensive, not flashy. Soft navy cotton simple neckline, the kind of elegance she had once loved before. She gave up such things. And on the mirror, another note, "You're not my employee tonight." That evening, the glass nest looked different. There were candles flickering in the kitchen, jazz playing low, 2 plates set on the counter island. Julian stood in a navy button-up shirt sleeves rolled just enough to show ink stains on his wrist. "You came," he said. Isla hesitated at the threshold. "I shouldn't have. You did anyway." He poured her wine. They talked. About nothing at first. Music, architecture, the wildflowers that grew near the cliffs. Then slowly it shifted. He asked her what her favorite material to work with had been. She said concrete. He asked why. "Because it's raw," she answered. "You can mold it, but it never forgets what it was." He nodded, like people. The silence that followed was heavy but not uncomfortable. She asked about his work. He showed her a prototype on his tablet, a user interface built on sensory feedback, not language. It was beautiful. Isla stared at the screen. "You built this," he shrugged. "I used to build things for everyone else. Now I build what I need to feel something again." "And do you?" she asked. He looked at her steady. "Only when you're near." Her breath caught. Julian leaned forward, then not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to reach across and take her hand. His fingers were warm. She didn't pull away. The kiss that followed was soft, hesitant, as if they were both afraid of waking up from something fragile. But it didn't feel wrong. It felt like a truth, waiting to be spoken. When they pulled apart, Isla whispered, "I shouldn't be here." Julian shook his head. "Pretending we don't feel this, that's the real mistake." After that night, nothing changed publicly. But privately, everything shifted. He gave her access to more rooms, more tasks, more time in the studio. He asked her opinion before making layout changes. He left books on her cart with sticky notes marking his favorite passages. And she responded with sketches, folded pages, and quiet glances that said more than any conversation could. But she never told him the truth, not her full name, not her past, not the scandal that followed her like a shadow. She couldn't. If he knew who she really was, he might see her differently. He might not see her at all. Then the letter arrived. It came in a plain envelope with no return address, slipped under her door like a secret. Inside was a photograph of Isla at 17, standing beside her father at a press conference, and one sentence scribbled in black ink. "You can't hide from your blood." Her hands shook. Her heart pounded. She tore it up, flushed the pieces, and sat in silence for hours. Someone knew. Someone had found her. She debated leaving. She almost packed. But that night Julian found her in the greenhouse. "You've been avoiding me," he said. She nodded. "I thought it would be easier." "For who, you or me?" She looked at him. "You deserve someone without baggage, without scandal, without a name that drags down everything it touches." Julian stepped forward. You think I care where you came from? I care about who you are when you look at me. Her walls cracked again, but before he could kiss her, she stepped back. I'm not ready. He didn't argue. He just nodded. Then I'll wait. That kind of patience broke her. Because no one had ever waited before. They had only taken. Julian didn't take. He stayed just far enough to make space. But she knew space wasn't enough. One day he would find out everything, and when that happened, she wasn't sure if even his patience would save them. The glass nest was not built for chaos. Every inch of it had been designed for order, silence, and control. But chaos does not knock before entering, and it often arrives dressed in the familiar. Her name was Celeste. Julian had not seen her in 2 years, not since the day she announced their breakup on a late-night talk show without warning him. She had been his fiancée, his partner in business and life, until she sold their story to a streaming platform and turned his heartache into headlines. When she appeared uninvited at the gates of the glass nest, the staff hesitated, unsure whether to admit her. She used her old access code and walked in like she still belonged. Julian was in the studio when she arrived. Isla was in the corridor outside, carrying a stack of towels. She heard the laugh, first sharp and sweet, the kind designed to slice through any room. When she turned the corner, she saw them Celeste, leaning against the kitchen island, Julian, standing still, expression unreadable. Isla stepped back before they noticed her heart thudding. She shouldn't have stayed, but she did. She listened. Celeste's voice danced with practiced charm. I heard you've developed a taste for staff now. She smirked. That's adorable. Julian didn't answer. Celeste walked closer, her heels clicking. You disappeared. The world thought you lost your mind. And now I come here to find you living with your cleaning girl. She's not my anything, Julian said coldly. Not yet. But it's obvious, darling. You forget I know how you are when you fall. Isla's chest tightened. Celeste laughed. You've always loved damaged things. It makes you feel like a savior. Just be careful. They start to depend on you. Then they destroy you. Julian didn't reply. He walked away. Celeste left shortly after, but the damage was done. Isla stayed away for days, doing only the essential cleaning, avoiding his gaze, keeping her distance. Julian noticed. He tried to speak to her, but she kept the conversations short. She couldn't unhear those words. She couldn't stop thinking about how easily the truth could destroy everything they had built in silence. One evening, Julian found her alone in the studio. She was sketching without realizing it, lines trembling. He sat across from her, his voice quiet. Don't disappear on me. Isla didn't look up. Your ex is right. I don't belong here. I don't even have a real past to offer you. Julian reached out and gently tilted her chin until she met his eyes. You think I care where you came from? I care about who you are now. I care about how you see this house, how you see me. That should be enough. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to live in that moment in his words. But fear had deep roots. That weekend, a second envelope arrived, another photo, another note. You can change your name, but not your truth. Isla burned it, but the fear remained. That same night, as she stood outside the studio, Julian approached. You're hiding something, he said softly. She nodded. I'll wait, he said again. And that was worse than any threat. It was kindness, unwavering, undeserved kindness. Julian began to distance himself, not out of anger, but to give her space. The mansion felt colder, their glances shorter. their touches less frequent, but the longing remained. Isla missed him more than she admitted. Meanwhile, someone else didn't miss a thing. Celeste had left, but her reach had not. She contacted someone in Julian's inner business circle, a board member known for ambition and loose lips. His name was Marcus. It took him less than a day to find the old articles. Isla Moreno, daughter of Elias Moreno, indicted in a national investment fraud case. A family name that once stood tall, now buried beneath lawsuits and shame. Celeste had the file delivered to the board. The board, in turn, delivered it to Julian's desk with a note. "You should know who you're letting into your home." Julian sat for hours staring at the image of Isla at 17, standing beside her disgraced father. He felt no anger, only sorrow. She had never used his name, never asked for favors, never once tried to manipulate him. She had simply worked, quietly, honestly. And she had been afraid. He understood that now. He summoned her to the rooftop garden. She arrived nervously, unsure of what he had seen, what he knew. He handed her the folder. "Is it true she didn't cry?" She nodded. "That's why I work here. I couldn't face the world anymore." Julian stepped closer, placed his hand on her cheek. "I don't care about your father's sins. I care about the woman in front of me. I'm falling for her." She sobbed, not out of shame, but out of relief. He had seen the scars and still chosen her. That night they kissed again, not out of confusion, out of certainty. From that moment they stopped hiding. Julian began speaking to her openly. They had breakfast together, walked the cliffs at dusk, shared music in the studio. The staff gossiped louder now, but Julian didn't care. He made his choice. One morning, as they sat reviewing layout plans, Isla spilled coffee on his shirt. She panicked. "I'll get a cloth." He stopped her gently. "No, stay." They stayed there for hours, saying nothing. Peace, the kind neither of them had known before. But peace never lasts where jealousy lives. Julian received a security report. One of the staff had been accessing Isla's quarters without permission. He reviewed the footage. Marissa, the longtime house manager, had gone through Isla's drawers, taken her journal, and leaked it to the board. Julian fired her on the spot. No warning, no apology. She left without a word, but her glare lingered like poison. Isla felt guilty. "I didn't want anyone to lose their job because of me." Julian's response was calm. "She tried to destroy what matters to me. I don't tolerate that." Her heart raced. He didn't say who. He said what. That evening she found a package on her pillow. Inside was a velvet box, not a ring, a key, to the studio. A space no one else had ever entered without his permission. She held it to her chest like a vow, and finally she believed. They began to build a rhythm that felt almost like a life. The mornings started with soft jazz and shared silence over coffee. Afternoons unfolded with quiet companionship. Isla sketching in the studio while Julian worked on his prototypes, their energies separate but aligned. Evenings turned into slow walks along the edge of the cliffs, the sea wind braiding itself into Isla's hair as Julian listened to her thoughts, the ones she never thought she'd share with anyone again. She told him about her mother's illness and the hospital bills that swallowed everything. She told him about New York, about how she once dreamed of opening a studio of her own, filled with light and laughter and students who saw design as a form of healing. She didn't tell him how she used to sit at the top of the stairs in her childhood mansion, watching her father lie to investors with the same smile he gave to his family. She didn't have to. Julian understood the kind of silence that guilt carves into people. He never asked for more than she could give, but the more patient he was, the more she gave freely. Their connection no longer needed careful navigation. It simply existed real and steady. Then one morning he surprised her. "I want to take you somewhere," he said. Where she asked, somewhere without locks, without whispers, just us. She hesitated, but he smiled. "Let them say what they want. I'll only be listening to you." That weekend they left in his private car, no staff, no luggage beyond what Isla packed herself. The villa was nestled in a hidden cove surrounded by white sand and turquoise water. It looked like a memory, something imagined but too beautiful to exist. They spent the first day barefoot walking the shore, laughing like they had forgotten how to be broken. That night, Julian burned the dinner, and they laughed so hard Isla cried. Later, under a sky full of stars, Julian turned to her. "You changed me. You reminded me how it feels to feel." Her eyes shone. "You made me believe I could be more than my past." He reached into his pocket and handed her a small velvet pouch. Inside was a necklace with a silver key. "This opens the drawer in my studio where I keep the things that matter. Now that includes you." Isla didn't speak. She just leaned into him, holding on as if letting go would unravel everything. When they returned to the glass nest, the house felt different, warmer, softer. Julian gave Isla full access to the studio. She reorganized it gently, respectfully, as if aligning herself with his world instead of changing it. She wore the key around her neck, tucked beneath her blouse, a quiet symbol of belonging. But outside the walls, the world had begun to stir. Julian's business partners noticed his shift. They whispered in meetings, asked quiet questions. One day during a private pitch meeting, an investor leaned close and asked, "Is it true? Are you living with the maid?" Julian said nothing. He simply walked out. Isla noticed the tension. She offered to step back to disappear if her presence damaged his reputation. But Julian stopped her. "Your presence gives me peace. Let them choke on their opinions." One morning, Isla wandered into the studio alone. She used the silver key and opened the drawer. Inside were dozens of sketches of her. Drawings of her reading, cleaning, laughing, even crying. Each one captured a moment she hadn't realized he had witnessed. Her hand trembled as she flipped through them. He had been watching her far longer than she'd known. Julian entered silently and stood behind her. "You were my muse before I admitted it to myself." Isla turned to him and spoke the words she had been afraid to say. "I love you." He didn't answer. He just pulled her close, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. They began making decisions together. Julian asked her opinion on design elements in the house colors. For the dining room, even artwork for the entryway. Slowly, the mansion stopped feeling like a monument to silence and became something living. But peace, no matter how deep, never lives without resistance. Julian's cousin Victor arrived without warning. Arrogant, entitled, and loud, he walked into the house, with judgment written across his face. "Are you seriously turning everything over to a maid? Do you know how ridiculous that sounds?" Isla stood to leave, but Julian reached for her hand. "She's worth more than anyone who judges her by her job. If you can't respect her, you can leave." Victor left furious but not defeated. He began planting seeds of doubt among Julian's board members, whispering about Isla's influence, her past, her potential motives. Isla had no idea. She spent her days restoring small parts of the house that had long been neglected and her nights sketching spaces for a home she never believed she could have. Julian had plans. He took her to a garden one evening under string lights and petals floating through the air. "I want you to move in fully, not as staff, as the woman I love. Will you?" Isla said yes, not with hesitation, but with a promise. She would no longer run from her past. She would stand beside him no matter the cost. But the storm came quickly. Victor struck during a major board meeting. He presented altered emails, forged data, and manipulated timelines to make it seem like Isla had been interfering with Julian's decisions. He accused her of accessing confidential files, of steering Julian for personal gain. Isla was blindsided. Julian defended her fiercely, but the board demanded an inquiry. Isla offered to walk away. "I don't want to be the reason they destroy what you built." Julian looked around the room and said, "If they force me to choose between a company and the woman who healed me, I choose her." Silence fell like a stone. The lines were drawn. Some board members stepped back. Others rallied behind Julian. Isla stood outside the meeting room, eyes burning. Julian emerged hours later, his face unreadable. Victor had been exposed. A hidden security recorder Julian installed weeks ago had captured Victor admitting to the setup. He was removed from the company, humiliated in silence. The company stabilized. Julian returned to work, but he didn't smile until he came home. Isla was waiting, arms open, eyes full of quiet strength. That night they didn't toast or celebrate. They sat barefoot on the kitchen floor, eating leftover pasta and listening to rain. "You saved me," Julian whispered. Isla smiled. "No, we saved each other." Months passed not in a blur, but in soft waves that reshaped everything gently. The glass nest became more than a sanctuary. It became a home. The cold lines of steel and glass were softened by Isla's touches. Curtains hand-stitched in the mornings, framed sketches hung in narrow hallways. Books that didn't belong to Julian filling corners he had once left bare. He let her in fully, not just into his space, but into his rhythm. They began spending weekends at the villa by the sea, the one with white sands and the memory of their first shared laughter. There, Julian learned to wash dishes without breaking them, and Isla learned that being loved did not mean losing herself. One morning at the villa, Isla handed him a small box. Inside was a silver lapel pin, engraved with the word "beginning." "Because you were mine," she said softly. He wore it proudly, not just in meetings, but in moments that mattered, to show that his new beginning had nothing to do with image and everything to do with truth. When they returned to the glass nest that spring, Julian surprised her. He took her hand and led her to the same hallway, where everything had started, where the door had once opened too soon. The lights were dimmed, the air smelled faintly of lavender and sea salt, and soft candlelight flickered along the glass walls. There, on the spot where her towel had dropped and her fear had risen, Julian knelt down on one knee. "That day everything changed," he said, "and every day since I've loved you more. Will you marry me?" Isla's answer was a whisper. "Yes." The wedding was quiet, intimate, and without spectacle. Isla wore a cream dress she had designed herself, the lace stitched by her own hands late at night, while Julian read poetry beside her. Julian wore the same navy suit from the day he stood up to the board, the one where he chose her over everything else. The ceremony took place in the rooftop garden, now overflowing with blooms Isla had planted herself. The staff who had once tiptoed around them now celebrated beside them as friends. Even the old cook cried during his speech, saying she used to clean every surface with care. Now she's the heart of this house. There were no reporters, no flashes, no noise, just two people who had found a home in each other. A year later, Julian walked into the kitchen early one morning and found Isla barefoot, singing softly while making breakfast. She turned with a smile and held up a tiny white onesie. "I was going to surprise you later," she said, "but I guess now is a good time." Julian stood frozen. Then he laughed and lifted her off the ground, spinning her in circles as tears streamed down his face. They laughed, cried, and held each other in the same kitchen where they had once only passed in silence. Their story had started with an accidental door, a moment never meant to happen. But it had, and it led to everything. From maid to muse, from silence to sanctuary, Isla became more than someone who cleaned the dust. She became the woman who taught him how to feel again. Julian, once a man defined by loss, was now known not just for what he built, but for what he protected. And at the center of it all was love not flashy, not loud, but steady and true. Sometimes fate doesn't knock. Sometimes it opens the wrong door. And sometimes that's exactly where you're meant to begin.